In 2019, at the Central Latino at Fuller Theological Seminary, we carried out a study of the faith of Latinx millennial Christian leaders. And as we talked to them, I kept hearing a drumbeat under the words. The same song, the same hunger for the same kind of vibrant, holistic Christian community. And it echoed for me because I had experienced a community very much like the one that they longed for when I was their age, in the base Christian community movement of the 1970s and 1980s in Latin America and the Philippines. And I was also hearing from these young leaders that their hunger was being fed by Anglo models of church renewal and church planting, and it wasn't filling them up, and it was giving them cultural indigestion. And so I kept feeling this tug. I kept feeling the tug to share what I learned and experienced, the core characteristics of the base Christian communities, the core principles that guided them and shaped them. But I never would have done it until I taught a conversation with Brandon.
At that time, I was planning a church in an urban center after Trump was elected and during the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was trying to reach Black and brown folks enraged and mourning the attack on Black lives and frustrated with how overwhelmingly the church just wasn't present. And when the church did show up, it was more often to really lead and not to listen. So I wanted to know what was a model of church that would speak to these conditions. You know, a church that put the most marginalized at the center, the poor, queer folks, women and children from Black and brown communities, and a church that didn't make community organizing and public liturgy as an option, but actually put it at the very heart of what the church did. And so I turned to you and to other elders for help, and I discovered the base ecclesial communities and the hush harbors as grassroots and frontline models of church led by Black and brown and poor folks that transformed the society. And in the process, they also transformed what it meant to be church.
Amen. Well, so as we talked to each other, we began to discover a short list of principles that shaped and guided this kind of vibrant, holistic Christian community, and that literally translated across race and space and time. And so we decided that we needed to put this together in a book, that we needed to put these core principles that were the same, adding our slants, adding our stories. And we decided to call the book Buried Seeds because there was a saying from a Greek poet from the 1960s. He said, they thought they buried us, they didn't know we were seeds. And I had heard that saying in Ethiopia, I had heard it in Latin America, I had heard it in the Philippines. On another note, we both realized that the book would be useful for people in different social positions, but we wanted to speak to them directly about how it would be differently useful for different folks. So, you know, in my experience, the Bible often speaks differently to people in different contexts, but we often address the wrong scriptures to the wrong people. So we tell the poor to be content with their lot. We tell the rich to seek for abundant life, when it may be the reverse is what God meant in these verses.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. And so we broke this up to speak to folks from different kinds of positions. And we wanted to use biblical figures to really connect with people. And those three figures were Amos, Lydia, and Ruth. And for Amos, you know, in ancient Israel, he was a shepherd. And a role reserved for the most marginalized among an already oppressed people. And so Amos becomes a prophet, a homegrown leader from the grassroots. Maybe you come from a marginalized group and you enter into this conversation from that place. Then you have Lydia, who was a businesswoman that supported the early church through her wealth. Maybe you come from a more privileged place and you enter the conversation from a place of privilege, like Lydia. Then you have Ruth. In the Old Testament, Ruth was a widow, a Gentile, and an immigrant. She was triply oppressed. She had little to no societal power in ancient Israel, but by the end of her story, she married a landowner, and she became part of the royal lineage of King David. Maybe you have experienced both privilege and oppression, and so you enter the conversation with us from that place. The point is that we want you to be choiceful. These positions, these social positions, they're not hard and fast. So we ask you to be honest and to really reflect on what lessons and ideas and challenges truly apply to you and which don't. The point is that we don't all come from the same level of power, and acknowledging what power and privilege and oppression we experience shapes how we show up in the work of faith and justice.
So whoever you are and wherever you come from, we hope that these ideas go beyond interesting to challenging, and maybe even beyond challenging to catalyzing life-giving change.